Let's move on from how is an individual team governed and how does it function. Let's go a little bit higher, kind of a 30,000-foot view. How is soccer managed globally? So professional football, or US soccer, is managed through this massive structure known as FIFA, the International Federation of Football Associations, essentially. And it's run similar to the Olympics. So basically, FIFA is comprised of 6 regional organizations, and the US belongs to CONCACAF, basically the Confederation of North Central American and Caribbean Association Football. So there are 6 regional associations, and each nation has its own football governing body within those associations. So let's see below here for a governing body example in US soccer. So let's say the newest club in LAFC, started, I don't know, 4 years ago, I think. They are a part of Major League Soccer. So this individual team is a part of Major League Soccer as a league, but Major League Soccer is a part of the US Soccer Federation. So that is the national governing body for LAFC. But it doesn't stop there. So the US Soccer Federation reports to CONCACAF, this regional governing body, and then CONCACAF falls under FIFA. So let's play that in reverse. LAFC basically has representation through their owners in Major League Soccer, and then Major League Soccer has representation in the processes of the US Soccer Federation, and the US Soccer Federation elects representatives to send to CONCACAF, and CONCACAF elects representatives to send to FIFA. Again, FIFA is the overarching governing body for international soccer. They have a president, and they have representatives from each of the regional organizations that serve on their executive council, and they are responsible for managing and providing rules and oversight for international football. Another example from the US women's soccer team, you'll notice probably if you've read recent media that the US women's soccer team is trying to negotiate better pay and improved pay and improved revenue sharing for the women's soccer team within the US Soccer Federation. So they can't just go directly to a particular league. They have to negotiate with the US Soccer Federation for equal pay. And then the US Soccer Federation gets advice from CONCACAF and FIFA, and they follow the rules and the revenue sharing structures of CONCACAF and FIFA. So there's a lot of potential politicking that's going on for the US women's soccer team right now, and it's making it difficult for them to just show the obvious pay inequality and use data to make a quick claim, because there's multiple levels of governing bodies related to US women's soccer. Therefore, there's multiple parties involved in the discussion, and this complicates things. Let's talk a little bit about the most popular soccer league internationally and use them as an example to see governance at the team level in action. So the English Premier League is the top soccer league in England, and some would argue throughout Europe. But it's a fairly recent league, and it actually began in the 1990s as European football needed restructuring. So football in England was losing money. Businesses weren't investing as much. The general population was not all that enthusiastic about it. I remember seeing on the web that less than 50% of the English population actually followed football, which sounds crazy when we hear of all the hooligans and the people who are just crazy fanatical about English football. But it was kind of suffering in the early 1990s. There was a big fire at one of the matches where over 50 people died. There was bad security at these events, and even fan violence was kind of off the hook. People weren't being controlled all that well. So kind of like in the US at the turn of the century, in American football, violence was making people notice and was kind of leaving a bad taste in their mouth for football. So the English Premier League separated from the English Football Association, and here's the big liftoff for them. They were given permission to negotiate TV contracts. And we know that once you've been given permission for this, then the revenue starts coming in. So once they were able to negotiate with TV companies, then their revenue started going up and they started attracting players throughout the world, and the talent level started going up and the product started improving, and they quickly became the top league throughout Europe. So as such, the revenue sources are very similar to the US. So rights to broadcast soccer is one of the primary streams of revenue for the English Premier League, as well as merchandising and ticket sales and advertising, basically related to the English Premier League. So in that way, it's very similar to the US. So teams within the English Premier League operate independently, like we said a few slides ago. There are 20 shareholders or owners in the English Premier League, and each owner is a part of a club and they get a vote. So basically, remember like the NCAA from a couple decades ago, where each member institution got one vote in the decision-making of the NCAA. It's very similar here in the English Premier League. One club, one vote. And so owners get together yearly. They propose rules and they vote on rules at the annual shareholder meeting. But then the rule book is basically the Premier League rule book, and that governs overall play in the English Premier League. But still, there's the independent clubs share the decision-making throughout the season through this one club, one vote format. And again, we already discussed promotion and relegation, that bottom finishers drop down, top finishers move up. In this case, everybody wants to move up to the English Premier League. But this is an interesting additional point. Let's say if Manchester United actually moved down to the English Football League, and then the next year they moved up to the English Premier League, whoever they replaced in the English Premier League would basically pay them ownership shares because they're now a part of the English Premier League. So that's kind of like stock in the company. It's money that teams get when they're promoted to a higher league, or it's money that some teams lose when they're relegated to a lower league. So I gave you kind of a crash course of governance, mostly in football, I understand, but football is the largest revenue producing sport internationally. And as football goes, so tends to go other sports at the international level. So that's why I spent the most time talking about FIFA and the English Premier League. For those interested in further study in international sport, I'll direct you here to current policy issues that these international clubs and leagues and governing bodies are facing. But just like the US, security is a major issue. Post 9/11, in any sport context, security becomes a daily ongoing issue, as do other social issues like racism or violence or gender discrimination. So while these social issues may look a little differently in an international context, everyone is equally concerned. Well, not equally. Everyone is concerned and should be concerned about these social issues and inequalities as they impact sport. Especially in football. Football has had to deal with racism recently. Think of the World Cup of the last couple, the World Cup happens every 4 years, but the last couple of World Cups have had special issues with racism in the host countries that they've had to deal with. And then this third thing, the financial impact of globalization. So obviously, if professional sport is big business, then, and there's a lot of money to be made, then politics play an ongoing role. And professional sport teams have to be aware of how to navigate and to come out ahead in political situations. So you may remember I brought up earlier in class the issue between the NBA and China. So the Houston Rockets general manager tweeted his support for Hong Kong and the protesters and said, "We support the right to free speech and protest anywhere in the world." China didn't like that. China boycotted the NBA on their 10-cent media outlet, and China still is not broadcasting live NBA games. So the NBA took tens of millions of dollars hit because of politicalization of the Hong Kong protests. We'll leave Brexit alone. If any of you are following England right now, they left the European Union, and that has a real impact on the financial aspect of football. So anytime there are large amounts of money to be made in sport, then owners, players, leagues, everyone involved in sport must be aware of how to navigate political issues. The final financial impact of globalization we're seeing played out in front of us right now with this COVID-19 virus. So I may send you a link to an article that I just saw yesterday, but it's trying to calculate the financial loss that US and international sport is facing because of COVID-19, and it's in the tens of billions of dollars already. So anytime there are health concerns, let alone pandemics, we immediately see how interconnected sport is globally. And more we're going to see that whatever impacts one country has the potential to impact the entire globe. So as future sport managers, you really can't afford not to be aware of what's going on outside Southern California and the United States. We really have to be aware of and even sometimes actively manage political issues in a global context, knowing that they really will impact our local team at some level. So I think I'm going to leave you with those slides for those who want to look in your textbook about issues that impact governance of international sport. But for now, thanks for listening. Hope it was somewhat enjoyable, and stay tuned for my next email announcement. I'll talk a little bit about our class group work scheduled for next week. Okay, have a great afternoon. God bless you all. Stay safe. Talk to you later.